Hello, we're going to talk about photosynthesis, and we have our objectives here like we do with every chapter. And so I'm not going to read through these. You can read through them. They're kind of important. This is what you should be able to do when you get done with your chapter. Here are your keywords. So these are your vocab words you should know. We're going to break this chapter into 3 parts. So I'm going to do 7.1 today, or in this presentation, I should say. So we have an overall view of photosynthesis. So food for cellular respiration. So organisms can be classified based on how they obtain energy-rich organic molecules for cellular respiration. Basically, we're saying there's 2 types of animals. There's autotrophs, and then there are heterotrophs. When we look at autotrophs, we can talk about there's kind of 2 subcategories within the autotrophs. Auto means that they make their own food. So we have our photosynthetic organisms, or photoautotrophs, that use light to make their food. And we have chemiautotrophs that use inorganic chemical compounds like sulfur as their food source. And then we have heterotrophs. Heterotrophs obtain food by eating other organisms. So our photoautotrophs include plants, algae, and certain types of bacteria. We have some pictures here of a fern, some algae growing here on this lake, and then we have some cyanobacteria here. So photoautotrophs synthesize food via photosynthesis, a chemical process by which a certain cell converts kinetic light energy, so that light energy here, into potential energy. That potential energy would be that locked up in the chemical bonds in the sugar molecule. We make that sugar by combining water with carbon dioxide. Plants and other autotrophs do not photosynthesize instead of cellular respiration. They actually do both. So what they're doing is they have, in photosynthesis, they have their chloroplasts, or they use their inner membrane as a substitute for the thylakoid membrane, which we'll talk a little bit about. And they make their food. So they make that food, and then they go ahead and take the food, and then they can break that down by cellular respiration. So they do both. So here's some plant anatomy, and we went through this in the lab, or we will be going through this in the lab. This is a cross section of a leaf. You've got on top this waxy layer that helps to prevent dehydration. And then we have our upper and our lower epidermis. And in the middle, this is referred to as the mesophyll, the cells in the middle. We have 2 types of cells in the middle. We have our palisade, and they look like kind of like the columns of a palace. They help to provide some structural support. We also have photosynthesis occurring here. And we have the spongy mesophyll. It's called spongy mesophyll because of all the pores, the openings between the cells. And so this is where most of your oxygen and your CO2 is going to be stored. So again, the mesophyll cells are where photosynthesis is actually occurring. So I already talked about the epidermis and the cuticle. The stomata are these pores that allow for the gas exchange. Those pores are made up with 2 cells called the guard cells. And those guard cells will open and close depending on how much water is available. We have CO2 that's going to be going into the stomata, and we have, let's do oxygen in red. Oxygen that's going to be exiting the stomata, but at the same time, we could have water vapor, and we don't want to lose water. So when it's really hot, and we'll talk about the different mechanisms plants use to help prevent too much water loss at the end of the chapter. The chloroplasts, so the palisade mesophyll, they have many chloroplasts. So again, this is where most of our photosynthesis is occurring. It's facing the sun. We have the structure of the chloroplast, which it has a double membrane, just like very similar to the mitochondria. We have our outer membrane. The inner membrane, you can say that like the inner membrane with those cristae kind of got pinched off into these structures called grana, or our stack called granum. In here, we have a fluid. The fluid inside here is called the stroma. The actual membrane itself is the thylakoid membrane. Here's an overview of photosynthesis. So we'll be doing the light reaction. And then the dark, this is called the dark reaction or the light independent reaction, or C4. There are 4 names for this process. We commonly use the Calvin cycle. And so the light reaction is going to harvest the light. It's going to basically be taking the products from the Calvin cycle and converting our empty battery to a full battery and stripping electrons. There's our electron carrier. The notice in plants, it has an extra phosphate. So it's NADP, has a phosphorus molecule there. It's going to be picking up electrons, and it's going to be grabbing those electrons off that hydrogen off of water, which is why we have the oxygen, which is left over. We don't want the oxygen. We want the hydrogen to harvest electrons like we were doing in cellular respiration. We're going to use that energy that we harvested from that light, that solar energy, and those electrons to combine with carbon dioxide to make our sugar. We'll talk about what G3P is when we get to the Calvin cycle. So again, it can be broken down into 2 stages. The light dependent reaction, we need light and water. Like I said, the water is oxidized, which produces that waste oxygen. We are also going to phosphorylate our ADP to ATP and reduce our NADP+. The Calvin cycle, which occurs in the stroma, will be powered. We need that ATP to power it, and we're going to get those electrons that we put on our NADP+, and then carbon dioxide, and we're going to combine our carbon dioxide and our electrons to make simple sugars. And that is it for this first part of this chapter. And again, hopefully this chapter will be a little easier because you're going to see that it's basically kind of cell respiration in reverse. It has very similar processes as cell respiration. Again, as always, if you have any questions, give me a shout out, and I'll see you in the next video.